Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Total War Warhammer 2. I'm playing the Greenskins here against the High Elves, and I decided to show this battle because my opponent took a really interesting build, which I haven't seen a whole lot of. I've seen High Elf players go heavy cavalry before. I have never before seen a full cavalry build. So he's got 3 standard Illyrian Reaver archers plus the Heralds of the Wind, who are super fast. Back here he's got 4 Silver Helms with shields plus 1 Dragon Princes. He's got Tyrion on a horse with the various bells and whistles. And what has he brought? He's got the Sunfang, he's got Feint and Riposte, Stand Your Ground, Foe Seeker, and the Heart of Averlorn. And then he's also got a Noble on a horse, and the Noble has Deadly Onslaught, Foe Seeker, and the Sacred Incense for missile resistance. So very interesting build. My army build. I've gone pretty heavy skirmish because I feel like that's usually a good thing to do as the Greenskins against the High Elves. So I've got over on this side, I've got a pocket of skirmishers with the Death Creepers, Goblin Wolf Rider Archers, and a big boss. And over here, I've got Mogreb's Mangy Marauders for armor piercing, a Goblin Wolf Rider Archer, and another big boss. Front line of Goblins, some Black Orcs, and Savage Orc Biggins behind them. 1 Doomdiver Catapult, because I think you should usually have a piece of artillery. I find artillery super useful, tactically speaking. I have Wurzag back here. Wurzag being probably the most competitive Greenskin Lord. Effigy to get is fantastic. Of course, I've got the Wah, Get Back Ear, the Foot of Gork, Here We Go, Fists of Gork, and Brainburster. I did bring Brainburster. Often usually I don't think it's very useful, but I brought it. And the Bonewood Staff and the Squiggly Beast, as well as Wurzag's Revenge. So lots of abilities on him. And then kind of in the back, I've got 1 unit of Orc Boarboy Biggins. So I was a little bit surprised when I saw this build, to be honest. I was not expecting this. But looking at it, if you look on the tactical map here, I'm wider than he is. So these skirmishers, unless they get around behind me, aren't really going to be accomplishing a whole lot because they're going to be shooting into my front line. Meanwhile, I have decent counter-skirmish ability. You can see, the Illyrian Reaver archers take pretty significant damage when I shoot into them, and losing Goblin Wolf Rider archers in exchange for Illyrian Reaver archers is fine. I'll take it. Back here, I've got the little goblins zooming in on the Dragon Princes, and they do, well, when they hit, they do pretty significant damage. That was like 10% damage in 1 volley, something like that. No model's dead yet, but meanwhile, I'm pushing my infantry line forward and spreading out. I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, look, I've got to keep them corralled. Can't have them getting around behind me, getting into my back line. I don't have much of a back line. I didn't bring any Goblin Archers or anything. But the Doomdiver is quite useful. I actually popped the Wah here because we were piling in on these goblins and my infantry and Wurzag were getting a charge in. My opponent here is very good at dodging. He's very good at dodging the Wah, at dodging my spells, and that's a common theme throughout the battle. But every time he comes in against me, he's being constantly harassed by the archers, and he's constantly having to keep an eye out for the infantry. He's charging in against these goblins here, and with the Wah on, even goblins are pretty respectable. This Goblin Big Boss is soaking up a whole bunch of arrows because he does have shields and all. And my artillery is keeping a lot of good pressure on the cavalry. Back here, he's got his missile cavalry. Oh, I did have a Vanguard deploy I forgot about. I had a unit of Night Goblin Squig Hoppers back there in the woods. Now, over here, what's happened is I hit Tyrion with... I think this is when I hit Tyrion with Effigy of Deget for the first time. These cavalry came charging in, or rather, no, that hadn't happened yet. I'm just piling in with everything. I've got my Boarboys coming up. I've got a Goblin Big Boss, Wurzag, a bunch of Goblins, and my Savage Orc Biggins all piled in, and we're just dealing damage to this whole blob of stuff here. So the Silver Helms are getting out with 40 models left. I've routed the unit of Goblins, but a unit of Goblins doesn't really matter much, and my Squig Hoppers are rushing in just to kind of muck things up insofar as they can. Over here, now I've got Tyrion kind of trapped. Tyrion's surrounded by my dudes. I'm dropping Here We Go. But once again, he dodges very effectively. The Here We Go didn't actually go off until after the combat was almost over. He's coming charging in to try and save Tyrion. I do still have Here We Go active on the Boarboy Biggins, so they're doing a lot of damage back. And of course, I've got archery fire, and now I have the Savage Orc Biggins coming in. So these cavalry are taking a lot of damage. Over here, Mogreb's Mangy Marauders just trading fire. They can do this, that's fine. I got a pretty nice Foot of Gork right there, and Foot of Gork is super effective against cavalry. So those Silver Helms, and those Silver Helms all took some damage. You can see they dodged it mostly, but they didn't quite get out of the way. I did stomp out a couple of models. Oh, I did not mean to fast forward there. So what's happening here is the enemy was just getting pushed back. He wasn't getting around my flanks enough to really take advantage of the full power of his cavalry build. I had hit Tyrion with the effigy to get once at this point, and that's when he'd taken a little bit of damage, and my artillery is still firing, still whittling away this cavalry from way back here. Only got 16 kills, but against heavy cavalry, 16 kills is substantial. We've now got the army divided into two parts. My Night Goblin Squighoppers caught those Silver Helms, and fun fact, Night Goblin Squighoppers, although their stats are not great, they do have a lot of armor piercing. So 19 AP damage, they can do work against cheaper cavalry, although really they want to be fighting infantry. But over here, Tyrion and his melee cavalry have been partially isolated. His ranged cavalry has been driven off in that direction. I think he was controlling them just in 2 groups, basically, or possibly 3 groups. And that left him very vulnerable to this kind of thing. My skirmishers are driving off his skirmishers who may have been on skirmish mode. And meanwhile, over here, Tyrion is now getting isolated. Got the Goblin Big Boss on him. The Goblin Big Boss can't beat him, but in the meantime, his melee cavalry are getting beaten to hell by my constantly pursuing infantry and Orc Boarboy Biggins, and now Effigy de Git goes down on Tyrion for the 2nd time. He has dropped Feint and Riposte, but it's not going to save him when all of my units, all of my anti-cavalry units collapse on him, and he takes a ton of damage in a fairly short order, dropping Here We Go again to overcome that extra melee defense. This noble is just sitting here watching while the artillery keeps coming in. Over on this side, some of my skirmishers have routed, but other skirmishers are still kind of keeping the enemy at bay. They're launching a desperate charge to try and save Tyrion, but he has broken and is being escorted off the field. So a very, very interesting match. You can see the balance of power is now shifting decisively against the High Elves. They still have all these melee cavalry just kind of sitting here, but I think at this point he'd kind of given up. He just wasn't paying a whole lot of attention in this last minute of the battle, possibly out of frustration at the general tactic not working. Also, can I just say, these Black Orcs take charges like champions. Didn't even get knocked over. Barely being pushed back. They're just standing there, slugging it out, cutting these cavalry up. My Night Goblin Squighoppers are getting pushed off the field here, but Tyrion is down, I believe. Or no, Tyrion's down. And the enemy forces are being pushed off. I drop a Brain Burster just for fun there. It does a little bit of damage. And army losses at that point hit the High Elf player, and the game is over. So, like I said, I didn't show this because of high levels of play, because there's certainly no high level of play on my end. But it was an interesting strategy. I've heard people talking about, certainly the, full skirmish, full cavalry High Elf builds. I've seen very heavy skirmish High Elf builds before. I don't think I've ever yet seen, as I said, a full cavalry build. And so this one was very interesting. Now, is it a good idea against greenskins? I don't think so. Because the fact of the matter is the greenskins have a lot of tools to counter this kind of stuff. You have very accurate artillery that can put down consistent damage on cavalry. You can see here, I may have only gotten 27 kills, but he only deployed a total of 400 models. So that Doom Diver there was killed, more than something like 8% of his entire army, and that's not counting the HP damage that it did. It put in quite a bit of HP damage, since cavalry models often aren't killed by the splash of a Doom Diver shot. Mogreb's Mangy Marauders, excellent skirmisher unit. AP damage, great at cutting down High Elf cavalry. Goblin Wolf Rider Archers, very cheap, not as good as Illyrian Reavers, but capable of contesting them for price. Of course, Orcs have the Orc Boarboy Biggins to ward off charges. They're too slow to really hunt down High Elf cavalry, but they're fast enough to kind of screen them out, because most High Elf cavalry don't want to get into a head-to-head slugging match with Boarboy Biggins, certainly not if they have support. And then, of course, Orcs have the Black Orcs and the Savage Orc Biggins, who are very, very strong anti-cavalry infantry units. So there's a lot of tools on the roster. On top of that, Wurzag. Wurzag kills mobility-based builds, because Wurzag can at any time just lock down your lord or your hero and single them out while the rest of your units are trying to retreat, to disengage and set up for another charge, which kind of disturbs the strategy. It forces you to fight on the greenskins' terms instead of getting to cycle charge the way you want. And you can see here, most of these units didn't get a whole lot of kills. Now, like I said, in the last minute of the game there, I think Osmani was kind of frustrated at how his strategy wasn't panning out, so he wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to his melee cav, and that's fair. But even so, Dragon Prince is only getting 37 kills. The Illyrian Reaver archers got more or less respectable kill numbers, but most of them were goblins. They were just shooting at my front line of cheap, silver-shielded, hard-to-kill with arrows, chaff, which is a big part of the strategy. And for greenskins, greenskins are not, in my opinion, easily skirmishable. There are some factions that are very easily skirmishable, but greenskins are not one of them. Skaven are fairly easily skirmishable unless they've brought artillery to counter that. Who else is really easily skirmishable? You can skirmish against the Empire, although they have a lot of more fixed ranged units that will hurt you back. But you can't really skirmish the greenskins. You can actually skirmish high elves. They have very powerful long-ranged archers, but often you can pick around the flanks and do some damage to them, which is why I brought all these guys. I was anticipating more of a traditional, front line, back line, heavy high elf build, maybe with sword masters or with several archers or something in the background, and these guys can kind of run around the flanks, chipping away and doing some decent damage in that case. Plus, of course, the vanguarded Night Goblin Squig Hoppers would have been very useful in that situation. That said, I was surprised at how effective these guys were. When they swept in and got that surprise charge, they actually killed a shocking number of High Elf cavalry. I didn't expect that. I knew they were armor-piercing, but my respect for Night Goblin Squig Hoppers has only grown, and to be honest, I already respected them a lot, because they're a very effective anti-infantry unit. So I thought it was interesting to see this kind of strategy, and it's interesting to talk about these different kinds of strategies that people take for different matchups. Now, there are, like I said, there are several factions that can skirmish well. There are some factions against which you don't really want to skirmish. If you wanted to, you could do a pretty respectable skirmish build with the greenskins. You can either take Warzog on the pig, which is probably the most competitive, or if you really want to meme it out, you can take like a Night Goblin Warboss on a Great Cave Squig, who is very fast, speed 82, so he can keep up with the light cavalry pretty well. He has the Spite at the Bad Moon, which honestly isn't very good, but you could do something like Get Back Ear, Wah, and then for items he does have the Tormentor Sword. The Tormentor Sword is fantastic for a skirmishy build like this, because he can lock down enemies for only just a few seconds, but that's long enough to either get away or line them up for a charge. If you take the Night Goblin Warboss, I do think you have to take a caster, so then you would be taking an Orc Shaman on a boar, probably, or because Night Goblin Shamans can't have mounts. They do stock, but they can't have mounts. So I'd probably take an Orc Shaman. For Orc Shaman spells, Gaze of Mork, nobody cares about. Brain Bursta, don't really need it. Edbutt, definitely nobody cares about. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Foot of Gork, Irigo, and Fist of Gork are all fantastic spells. And then for items, I would probably take the, well, to be honest, I wouldn't really bother with either of these most of the time. You could take the Skull Wand of Kaloth if you wanted, but it's 200 gold. And on a roster full of cheap units like this, that's a lot. And then for Missile Cavalry, definitely take Mogreb's Main Team Marauders. Definitely take the Death Creepers. Fill out with a bunch of Goblin Wolf Rider Archers, because they're so cheap. Look, if I wanted to, I could literally have a 20 stack of these guys. I still have 3,000 gold left. It's hilarious. But probably, 4 or 5 Goblin Wolf Rider Archers on top of that. Let's say 4. And then this leaves you with room to take other cavalry. You could take the Durkit Squigs and another couple of Night Goblin Squig Hoppers. Probably you would, definitely, no probably about it, you would want these guys and a couple of Orc Boarboy Biggins at least to give you some anti-large punch. This is the point where I would love to say that you take Orc Boarboys for anti-infantry work, but the fact is Orc Boarboys are terrible. They're god-awful. They're slow, their stats are low, their charge bonus is unexceptional, their HP is unexceptional for cavalry, they just have nothing going for it. Their armor is low, they're just awful. Never take them for anything. I've done testing. Orc Boarboys literally don't pay off against any unit type. They don't even pay out. The only time they come close to paying off is against heavily armored infantry in literally ideal circumstances where they can cycle charge over and over, and even then they lose against Longbeards. So never take them. Like, you could certainly do a kind of a trolly, skirmishy greenskin build. I would, since it's me, I would be strongly tempted to try and work some artillery in there. You could maybe take some squig herds. Squig herds can be funny. They're not very good, but they can certainly be funny, and against infantry they do a lot of damage. And they're cheap. I mean, they're cheap armor piercing. You could take 3 of them, have money left over. So the greenskins can do this, the high elves can do it, the dark elves less so. The dark elves can't skirmish nearly so well. They have good foot skirmishers, but for missile cavalry they're a little bit limited. They've got the Raven Heralds, they've got the Dark Riders. Dark Riders are, I think, too vulnerable to really pull this off effectively. And then they've got a lot of larger and slower monsters and very powerful infantry, so they don't really want to skirmish. But yeah, it was interesting. But because the high elves, like the high elves can pull this off, which is, you know, something not a lot of factions can. In order to win that match, I think he could have won it. But it would have required those Illyrian Reavers to be deployed a lot wider, to come in from a lot more angles, take out my artillery early on in the game. I wasn't really bothering to defend it much because I was just pushing forward against him, trying to drive him into the edge of the map. Taking out the Doom Diver would have been very, very effective. Concentrating melee cavalry to break me 1 unit at a time, concentrating them to try and take out the Orc Boarboy Biggins if at all possible. It could have been very interesting. I mean, it was a very interesting match, and I'm grateful that I got to play it. So in any case, what do you think? I mean, what do you think about skirmishing? I've heard some people claim that like skirmishers or skirmish cavalry are overpowered because they can stay away from the enemy easily and use all their ammunition. Other people say they're weak because they're so vulnerable and they have low armor. I think they're pretty decent overall, but it's kind of it's a push and pull. There are some situations in which skirmish cavalry is very, very effective, and then other circumstances where it's never going to pay off. And to be honest, I think against a skirmish-heavy faction like the High Elves, you have to take that possibility into account, that they're going to go very skirmish-heavy, which was why I took those skirmish units myself. As the greenskins who have cheap ones, you can take a bunch. If you're playing against High Elves as, say, dwarves, you don't have to worry about that so much because they're not armor-piercing, but you do still have to take some precautions because Illyrian Reaver archers can get around the back and start shooting at your slayers, weakening them up so they can't effectively stop the dragon princes and such. That can be very annoying. It's an interesting balance, and to be honest, I feel like Total War Warhammer 2 has gotten skirmish cavalry about right. Like, maybe not perfect, but they're pretty close. So in any case, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the match. It was just, like I said, not high-level play, at least not on my part, but it was interesting. It was a fascinating little tactic that was being used. It was interesting to see it being executed. It's something that I'll probably try at some point myself, just for fun. It's not how I prefer to play, but it would be very interesting to try it once or twice and see how it works in different matchups. But in any case, thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Get hyped for Vampire Coast, guys. It's going to be all kinds of fun.